So welcome to Talent Trailblazers, where we talk all things talent. So I'm Gautam, and Jess and I are very, very excited to have Cathy Henesey with us for this recording. And Cathy currently is the Vice President Talent Acquisition for AdventHealth, right? But Cathy, you've spent more than 2 decades in the talent acquisition field, and out of the 2 decades, almost 13 years, the last 13 years has been in healthcare,
Yes.
right? Which, as all of us know, is probably one of the most challenging, domains to be in as far as TA is concerned. So I think the first thing, I've been dying to ask you, Cathy, is how difficult is it really? I mean, is it as bad as we read that getting talent in healthcare is like super, super difficult? Or in your experience, it's not that bad and the media makes it out to be worse than it actually is?
It is. It is actually super difficult, as the media says, because the reality is the numbers are real, and that there are not enough healthcare workers to meet the demand. It's simple math. Thinking about baby boomers as they age and retire, they need more care, and so now they're entering into those years that need a lot more healthcare. And there was a long time in the 80s that people did not enter into nursing. The schools could not really accommodate the request, and they didn't have the teachers needed. And so our nursing staff themselves across the country are also entering retirement. So the Department of Labor has actually predicted this for a long time, that 23 through 25 will actually be the worst shortage of nurses that we will ever see. And that was without COVID. And we lost a lot of nurses to the COVID, just got out of the industry completely. So it's pretty bad. And it's still, we coming out of COVID, and it's still a high demand, high shortage. And then to couple that, think about the positions that are your lower level healthcare workers that are competing with now retail and restaurants and hospitality that make, less than $20 an hour. Those industries have really started to raise their living wages, basically, and exceeding sometimes $20 an hour, and that's competing with our hospitality positions and our food and nutrition and all those different level positions that we never thought of those organizations or industry as competitors before, but now they're competitors, right? Because they just have entry level points like we do, and don't require necessarily a lot of education. So we're finding ourselves competing with that.
Yeah, and that makes it even tougher, right?
Yes,
Because as
right. You have
opposed,
Disney,
the
in
pool is
Orlando.
small.
Yeah,
Mm.
and in Orlando, where our headquarters is, Disney is the largest employer, and then a second to that is probably all the hospitality organizations that go with that. We compete with them greatly, and it's really difficult.
And yet, Cathy, and I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. Your team is hiring close to 25 to 30,000 people a year. Is that correct?
Yeah, last year our record was a little over 37,000 employees
Whoa.
across the nation. Yes, so it was about 25, but 27,000 external. So that means new to the organization, came in from the outside, and then about 8 to 9,000 of those just internal movement from one business unit to another.
So that's like 2,000 people, or more than 2,000 people a month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
over in the height of COVID, we were processing more than 3,000 a month. It's a little about 100 a day.
Yeah. And I was again looking at some more numbers, and your team is more than 200 people. And I'm assuming these 200 people are all TA, like these are recruiters, right? Like corporate recruiters who go out and get talent.
Right at 250 plus some contractors. But that includes recruiting, sourcing, and our pre-boarding team who processes the offers, as well as we have an international recruitment team and a internal staffing agency that staffs nurses as well.
So how do you keep this team motivated? Right? Uh, in an environment which is super tough, which we just discussed about 2 minutes ago, with so much of competition for talent, right? As you said, hospitality is a new, competitor for talent, and then pressure on numbers is so high. I mean, it needs to be like a powerhouse, right, to be able to hit those numbers. So, how do you keep the team like energized? Maybe energized is the right word, not even motivated, right? Because motivation is not good enough. Energy levels need to be really high.
It is hard. And I think it starts with hiring the right people in the first place, right? It is making sure that you're hiring people that really are driven by our mission and our culture to serve the community. Many people are drawn to healthcare for many different reasons and really like to serve that public, as opposed to, maybe a Fortune 100 company that doesn't have those same missions and values. Nothing bad about that, but there are people that is most important to them over money. And so I think that's the kind of people that we attract to our own teams, and then they get to serve that in that stance. Now, of course, that means we still have to remain competitive in our pay and benefits, but we really serve that mission. And I think we have great leaders ourselves, and keeping it, particularly because we're remote, most of our team members are remote, keeping them engaged and doing fun activities, whether it's on virtual activities or just getting together locally to go to the dog park, or go to Top Golf and hit some balls for an afternoon. Just really keeping them motivated and talking together, and just doing fun activities. I mean, sometimes you just have to let it go and have some fun. And but I think they are certainly also driven by the success and growth that we've had. We've had a lot more opportunity to grow our own team and promote leaders from within. That's certainly motivating in and of itself as well, and getting to serve each of those divisions that we monitor and recruit for.
So, I'm going to ask you a bit of a trick question. So, would you say that recruiting for your own team is tougher than hiring nurses, or is it as difficult as hiring?
Well, that's a good question. Having just been in Colorado for 2 weeks trying to hire for our own team, it's not as hard as nursing. Certainly, there is a lot more talent acquisition people for the positions that are out there, so it's not as difficult. But it does hurt. It does hit home a little bit to make sure that we're hiring that right fit the right time, and so making sure that we can find people that fit our culture. But also bringing a diverse background. We're always looking for innovation and new ideas. So I really enjoy interviewing new talent acquisition people just to hear what they're doing. We've been fortunate enough, unfortunate for them, but with some of the high tech companies doing lots of layoffs, they've certainly laid off their recruitment team as well. And really seeing some incredible talent come from the tech industry that are available that we wouldn't otherwise have available. And I don't care if they have a healthcare background or not. Recruiting is recruiting, sourcing is sourcing. And so I know if they have those skills, then teaching the healthcare positions are easy.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point, because the pool would have suddenly expanded, right, because of the layoffs, and that would be helpful.
Myself, for my first 15 years of my career, and then I moved to manufacturing, and then moved to healthcare, and it's all the same tools and technology and sourcing.
Yeah, I'm going to pause. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Gautam. You know, Cathy, so my sister's a nurse, and last couple of years, my mom's one of those retiring nurses. She left a couple of years ago. And
Well,
so
we'll talk afterward. We have a place for both of them.
I'm just thinking about this scale and maybe help people even further. How big is the organization total staff?
Sure. So we are total employees right at 84,000. Now, when I started 6 years ago, it's right around 55,000. So we've grown almost 30,000. Now that has come through acquisitions, mergers, and some joint ventures. So 84,000 currently.
Okay, great. So we were talking a minute before the show about, for me, there's such an interest from high growth CEOs of okay, this stuff that we were good at when we got started, now we have to do it at a scale that neither I or anybody on our team has ever done. If you had advice for a high growth CEO who for the first time is into hundreds of staff, or for the first time is into thousands of staff, and they're trying to professionalize, they're trying to, maintain a level of excellence, but recruiting and scale, what advice would you have for a CEO like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you really have to really understand workforce planning. And, I think everybody, a CEO would probably want to think about typical growth in revenue, right? That's your natural growth and profit and assets. But they don't think about the actual staff themselves and how much is needed. And I think it really would behoove them to sit down with a good workforce planning statistics person and really map that out. Like if you want to double in size of the C, lots of CEOs say, "Oh, I want to double in size in 5 years." Well, great. Then how many people do you need in 5 years? And where, are you going to put them somewhere? Or are they going to be remote? And what does that look like from a scale standpoint? Thinking about leadership, and then what complications does that bring? Is you're going to have more costs and benefits and training and retention and an HR investment. And what does that look like from your tech stack? It's easy. You can buy some low cost applicant tracking systems and human capital management systems in small scale. But when you start to get larger and larger, then you really have to think about your tech stack. And that just costs more money, right? It's not just about revenue. It's really map that out over the next 5 years so that you can plan for that and really understand with scale and growth also comes the people that you need. And that requires talent acquisition. That's what you have to think about, right? You don't want to just buy a system for today. It's just like hiring people. I'll go back to the people is I always tell people don't hire a person for the role that they have today is can they be the next person in that next role and that next role? And do they have that mindset? Do they have that education, that ability? It's the same thing with your tech stack. How big will this tech stack hold us from a scale standpoint before we would have to get a new one? And so when you think about buying that, you have to think about, is it going to grow with us? Great. What is their largest customer? And how hard is it to scale up and how expensive is it to scale up? And so you just really have to think about buying those systems that maybe you might want to buy, that next scaled up system just to be able to grow into it, because you don't want to do implementations every 2 to 3 years.
Gautam, I know that you spent a lot of time on the tech side of talent acquisition. What kind of questions does that bring up for you?
I think, and that's leading into just thanks. My next topic of interest is that if you look at the tech stack, Cathy, evolve, and as we discussed earlier, you have spent such a long time in the TA industry. How do you compare some of the tech tools that you're seeing in the market today, right, as compared to what you were seeing maybe a decade ago?
Yeah,
right,
you
or even
remember when
earlier
I
than
was,
that?
you mean like when I was on a desk with no computers and just a phone? It's quite different now. I think what's great about talent acquisition is there are incredible tools out there. I mean, of course, being old school, I tell my team, oh my gosh, you don't even know how hard it was. But I think you can also get very buried in all the technology and not use it. That's the worst thing that can happen. And I think that starts with the applicant tracking system. We do such a great job as companies building and adding people to your ATS, but then you don't use any extraction tools to get all those people out that you built in 2 years ago. For example, we're always looking for nurses, right? And we every year are hiring graduate nurses right out of college. Of course, we're not hiring every one of them, but are we going back 2, 3, 4 years ago when looking at those people just graduated and going back to them and seeing where are they today with 3 years experience or 4 years experience, and really doing a concerted effort to recruit them? And so we're making sure that we're really using our current tech stack before we go and invest in others. Because you're paying for it, you might as well make sure that you're definitely using it. So you can't get enamored by all the different tech stack if you're not going to use it. So that's the key that I would say is make sure that the ROI is there and that you're using it.
And that pretty much leads me to my next question, Cathy. So if you look at the skills or the qualities of a recruiter, right? And I know that you have done a lot of training for recruiters, and I saw some numbers on your profile. You've trained hundreds and hundreds of recruiters on how to recruit, right? So if you look at the qualities of a recruiter, would you say being tech savvy right? And adopting and adapting to new tech tools would be one of the key attributes of a person joining the TA function today as compared to maybe a person who joined 10 or 20 years ago.
Yes, definitely. It definitely makes it easier for them to adapt to coming into a new system. If they've worked on different ATSs, they're very similar from one to another. So going to a new system, I think makes it definitely easier for them. I probably spend more time focusing on what is their sourcing foundation and what are the tools that they use to actually source candidates and then do something with them as opposed to the ATS itself. It's like, how are you digging deep and finding candidates? And really, then how do you use the internet deeply and Boolean searches and tool and sources that people don't go to, not job postings, right? The job postings is the easy way to find your active candidates, but I'm talking about more passive candidates. Where are they in that technical savvy piece is what I look for.
And if you compare a recruiter to a sourcer, right, and these are slightly different boxes, right? Would it be fair to say that a sourcer is more like a salesperson, like, or would you? Or what is your view on that? Like, how would you characterize these two boxes?
Actually, I kind of think it's just the opposite. I think you're a recruiter who who gets that lead from sourcing. It just depends on how you organize your talent acquisition team, but I think the sourcing person is really or should be really good at the hunting and finding those candidates and getting them out to a place to at least talk with. And then the recruiter can step in and really talk to them more about the actual opportunity itself, right? So sourcing is generating all kinds of nursing leads and where are they? And then where could we potentially put them? Then I look for the recruiter to take that over and talk about that specific position. If we're sitting in, Fort Worth, Texas, why is that particular hospital better than the one that they're working for? What is it that they might offer that might be attractive to them? If it's OR, nursing, or surgery, perhaps we've got the latest equipment in there that they will be able to be trained on and learn. So that recruiter should be the one that really knows their hiring manager and their environment really well to be able to sell that specific position. Where I look at sourcing is truly just the hunter and generating those leads.
So would it be fair to say, Kathy, that sourcing is pure, like if you look at a sales function, there's a lead gen and then there is a closer, right, who basically closes the deal. So, and if you look at the TA function in a similar fashion, the sourcer is a lead generator, right, and the recruiter is the closer. Would that be a fair assessment of what you're saying?
I think that's fair. Yep. Absolutely. But I think, obviously the sourcing person needs that experience as well, that closing. But I'll take the lead generation over the closing experience for sourcing.
And what about, Kathy, and there is a lot of conversation, and that's been happening for the last 20, 30 years on should companies outsource sourcing? And like a lot of companies outsource lead gen, right? And it's very popular across the board, and keep recruiting in-house, which is the closing part of it. Or you, in your mind, you should have both of the functions in-house.
I'm experimenting. I'm always experimenting with outsourcing because I do think there are things that can be done. There's great advancement in that RPO space or co-sourcing, and I think it could vary. I think it's great for transactional work. If you can find what we call transactional repeated service, that seems easy to outsource. And I'm looking at a couple of opportunities for that. So that really keeps what we call keeping people at the top of their expertise, their license. If somebody can, process the offer and do the paperwork behind the scene, if I can get that off of my sourcing and recruiter's plate, then that leads them to the ability to really close and hone in on that individual's what their needs are and what they're looking for, and so that can be done in an outsourcing opportunity for sure. But I think it's those transactional day-to-day tasks that could be done best by outsourcing. But I continue to experiment. I think I think they can also be good at front end calling and screening. We can generate great lists of potential people to call. And I'm looking at some opportunities offshore to give them those lists ourselves and then just create the phone call and to talk with them and find out where are they, what would they leave their current opportunity for, and just kind of go through a scripted phone screen. I think that is a great opportunity for outsourcing.
And I think that's something which is I'm hearing more and more people talk about it, right? I'm sure that there'll be a lot of technology tools also, which will come in that space, and that will be exciting. But moving back a bit on and coming back to one of my favorite topics, which is the traits of a recruiter, right? And we discussed some of that when we talked about the tech stack, but really speaking, even if you look at the last 20 years, despite the tech stack, at a base level, do you think anything has changed? Do you think the qualities of a recruiter, or what a recruiter should have, say in the late 90s, early 2000s, and what they have today, right? Do you think there is a difference, or it's pretty much the same? You're looking at similar kind of people even today to come into the TA function as you were looking at maybe 20 years.
I think it's a great question. Never thought about. I think it's the same, but I think it's where do they come from? Where I think the biggest difference is back when I started, when I made the transition from agency and consulting into the corporate side, it was very difficult for agency recruiters to make that transition because corporate just didn't hire agency recruiters. They didn't necessarily see that transition. And today, I think most TA professionals have learned that that is a great source of foundation if they can work in an agency first and really understand metrics. And that's where they really learn some great foundation in sourcing candidates and the art of cold calling, if you will, and the art of closing, right? And doing the pre-close and all the things that you learn in a high volume agency environment has not just become mainstream in corporate America. So most people start in agency, in their career first, and that's what we prefer to hire is the agency, and then we go into, and then they somehow made that transition to corporate.
And do you think agency recruiters have a natural advantage when it comes to hunting? Because that's what they've been doing while they were working with agencies.
Yeah, I just think you just have to think about, you just have to interview them. I think if you just come across a good corporate recruiter and they didn't have agency experience, I think you can look to other means to see how competitive they are. And they can definitely have that drive to be that competitive. You just have to kind of look at their background and see if they just lived in that kind of environment. Certainly, if they were like a high-tech corporate recruiter and never were an agency, I think they see that environment. I've been, fortunate for us, there has been, a layoff in the tech space. So I've seen lots of recruiters from Facebook and Meta and Twitter and you name it, Amazon. And those are pretty high functioning, high pressure jobs and may not have ever had an agency before. But they were just as metrics driven as an agency. So I see that same experience in those type companies.
Well, I want to talk about some of those skills. Thinking, we've talked so much about, talent acquisition across the organization, but, my fascination with helping high growth CEOs, thinking about them and skills that they may want to achieve higher levels of mastery at when recruiting those C-level executives for their team and those just giant critical hires. What's something that you see for like an executive or CEO who's great at that versus the ones who are good at that? What makes somebody great?
Great at recruiting executives.
Yeah, like you're the CEO and you need to get involved in getting this key C-level person to join the team.
Oh, I
the
see.
CEOs
Okay.
who are good at that versus the CEOs who are great at that. What's a great CEO doing that a good CEO isn't?
Right. As somebody who really looks at why, I'd like to keep my tabs on what executive TA leaders are moving around the country and who's hiring them and why. I think the first difference is from one CEO to another CEO is really understanding the value of talent acquisition in an organization. Is it just a personnel administration function, or is it a true key stakeholder in the success of the business? And it's very easy, if there a position out there when I've interviewed in the past, to understand where is that organization in their own evolving workforce planning status, if you will. So to me, that first step is knowing the difference and what is it that they need. And then if they understand that difference, then they understand the real value of somebody that has had an actual career in talent acquisition and their own growth and recognizing that as a profession itself. Then I think they're much better suited to know what to look for, and have they been a part of that strategic growth versus just a personnel administrator. That's old school.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, okay, along similar lines, when you think about closing skills when it comes to recruiting, what's one that maybe isn't as obvious, or what do you think is the most important skill when it comes to, really getting over the finish line with this large key hire that the organization needs?
Sure. I think it's good at sales one-on-one is pre-close and the intake session, right? So when you meet a candidate for the first time, it goes on both sides, but when you meet a candidate for the first time, you really have to spend time understanding why are they leaving, or why are they even considering an opportunity, or why did they apply for your position, or if you just approach them passively, what would it take? And make sure that you spend a little bit of time on that and deep diving in that, because those things get lost along the way as they interview more companies or they get maybe money thrown at them. You always have to come back to remind them that this is what they're looking for and doesn't match that. And then as you talk to them about the opportunity you may have, you have to be a good reminder of why that is, or what is that. And, it comes down to a potential offer, reminding them as those things in that conversation that they had. I've turned around candidates that have gotten higher offers because I've used that. This is what's important to you, whether it's growth, maybe the position might be offering more money, but it's the height of the ceiling and that's it. They can't go anywhere. And just reminding them of that and being able to close on those values or what was important to them. Particularly like in a faith-based organization such as ours, we pay competitive, but we're not going to overpay, right? We have to work in the healthcare space and the non-healthcare space, but there's a lot of other things that are more important to candidates. And so we have to remind them of that. And even for the hiring manager side is the same, is spending that upfront intake session, really understanding what is going on in their organization and why do they need a person? Because they're going to always start out with a laundry list of everything they want, right? But you have to spend time understanding what problem is this person going to solve? What can they do in the first 90 days? What are they going to do in the first year? And then making sure that you may find that experience, but maybe they don't have the 5 years that somebody needs, but maybe they have 3 years, but they solved that exact problem before at a previous company that hiring manager needs. And that's an easier sell to them if you have that knowledge on both fronts.
Why do you think people miss that? Why do you think that some folks don't get that?
I think it's rushing through the process and getting excited. I mean, for the recruiter, who finds a great candidate, they just, are overwhelmed with the number of recs. I've seen crazy numbers that, recruiters are having to manage and we have to manage it ourselves. But if you're managing, 60 to 150 recs, you see a great candidate, you just push it to the manager and you hope they like them and you hope they make an offer, right? But that gets really hard at the end of the day when you're trying to close somebody and you don't know much about them and you don't even know why the manager likes them. That you've just I try to teach that you put a lot of time on yourself at the end. If you would have spend a little bit of time up front more, that would make that close process a lot easier. So rushing on both sides. The hiring manager needs to fill a position. The recruiter wants to fill a position. And we just try to rush to the end very quickly. And then we definitely get stuck at the closing if you don't do it right.
It's interesting. It sounds like you can either be efficient along the way or efficient at the end because you took your time along the way. Is that fair?
Right. It's it's going to get you one way or another. You might get lucky every now and then. It's a perfect match and everybody says yes, 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 and it goes through. But those are far and few between.
Yeah, I remember this little story when I was a kid about like there's like a tortoise and a hare and they're both trying to get to the finish line. I don't know if you've heard that one, but
yes, yeah, and these are people's career, right? And then it can sometimes spook them if it goes so fast. They're like, "Wait a minute, this is too easy." Let me ask about this, or what's wrong with this. So I think there's a fast way to be efficient, but also make sure that we are showing both sides that we're meeting their needs and finding the match.
Yeah. I'm going to put words in your mouth, so correct me here, but it kind of feels like the holy grail here is like, can you use tech and these things to be efficient while like maximizing the human connection and like deeply understanding them as a human? Is that, would you say?
Absolutely. And I think if you spend that time up front with the hiring managers, trusting, so they can trust you to know that, I might only present you the best 3 candidates, but I know you have done all the work behind the scenes to these are the very best 3 that I can choose from confidently, right? Same with the candidate. You've told me what you need. I don't need to, send you to 10 different hospitals of ours to see what's the best fit. This is what you've told me, and this is what I'm presenting to you. In a perfect world, I love that 1-to-1 relationship or 1-to-1 hiring ratio. Yeah. I'll settle for 2-to-1. 2 candidates to a hire.
Yeah. Gautam, I know these are subjects you've been thinking about for your 2 decades plus in the industry. Where does that make you want to go?
Yeah, no, I actually, Jess, I wanted to pick up on a thread which you started about 5 or 8 minutes ago, which is on the CEO versus, not versus, CEO and the TA function. I think, Cathy, you had a very interesting take on, is it strategic or is it personal or administrative? And I think that's a very significant difference, right? So I'd like to lead with one question here is that, how do you think this has evolved over the last couple of decades? Like, do you think now CEOs of companies are looking at TA more as a strategic function as compared to just being an administrative function? Do you think that attitude has changed, or do you think things are still pretty much where they were, even when we were in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I would say that I think probably if I just had to throw a number, I think probably 80% of CEOs are there understanding that it has to be such a strategic part of the organization and understanding workforce planning long term, and that the people are really the asset of the company. And the other 20%, they probably have just been so lucky and having such an abundance of candidates. Maybe it's their industry or maybe it's the brand name, and that they're just a commodity. And if they turn over, they turn over. That's fine. It just hasn't been a part of their business to really understand that. But given the shortage, just the labor shortages overall, I think most CEOs have got there and understand that importance.
And therefore, in your industry, which is healthcare, one would expect that all CEOs would have got it, right? Because in your industry, the shortage is so acute that, if you're leading the company and you haven't got it as yet, then, it's really going to be a problem, right?
Right. Well, yeah, it's funny because I say that all the time, that it is not the medical service itself that is our product. It is the people, right? We can have all these big fancy hospitals and big fancy equipment and high tech equipment, but they're not going to operate alone, right? I mean, people operate all of these things. People operate the hospitals. People operate the machines. People greet you when you come to the hospital. It's the people first before all of the technology and innovation and the hospitals themselves. So it is the people that is our product. And I think most hospital CEOs really understand that now.
And what about people who head TA functions today? And I know you had a very, very large TA function, and we discussed the numbers about 10 to 15 minutes ago. But do you think their profile has changed? Do you think there are more diversity there in terms of different streams? Like there are people coming in from sales, or there are people coming in from other functions? Or do you still think that most people who head TA have started their careers in the TA function itself, and just grown in that ladder? Have you seen any change there, more at a peer level to you?
Well, I definitely think there are many more HR people that have chosen a TA career profession like I have, but I still see lots of different people that come into TA later in life or just come in and out of TA. Right? I love if our TA people if I lose a TA person to like an HR director or any of our other HR teams, like learning and development or employee relations, any of those other departments, and even just to go into the field, maybe patient relations, then I love it because then I know that that's one more person that really understands talent acquisition and how difficult it is to find people, right? If they can have that just a couple of years stint in their career, then I know there'll be a well-rounded leader or HR professional. So I still see people come in all the time from different places, but definitely, if you ask me over time, we see a lot more TA professionals than you ever saw before.
And what do you think is the role of training here? Like as we discussed earlier, you spent a lot of time training recruiters. How do you think that has evolved? Like if you look at training over the last again decade or so, and again there's a lot of technology there now, even just in the training industry, right? As compared to
Sure.
what it was in the early
Yeah, I
2000s.
mean,
How
the conferences that have evolved. I mean, like a SourceCon and Sourcing Institute, and so many specialized training companies that exist just to train recruiters and sourcing people never existed before, and even certification. So, I think most 20 years ago, companies just trained themselves in house. And you really only saw maybe 15 years ago, and then really in the last 10 years, an evolution of organizations that is their primary focus is to offer training to recruiters and your sourcing staff.
and if you look at training as a specialized function, do you think we have now reached a stage in the TA industry where trainers for TA is like a specialized vertical by itself, or you think we haven't got critical mass on that as yet?
I don't think we've got critical mass yet. I think there's some great fundamental classes out there for that less than 5 year experienced person to get them to a great functioning standpoint. I don't know that there is probably enough for that senior person to take that experience and really take it to the next level and think about long-term pipelining and how do you we can do lots of name generation. There's a ton of classes on name generation, but we don't spend a lot of time in what do you do with that name, how do you store it? How do you keep it for 5 years? And how do you tap into it again? So I think there's more opportunity for that long term recruitment pipelining and making sure that you really are maximizing, years, if not decades, of candidates that you have collected in your own databases.
Yeah. Over to you, Jess.
Well, I know we're kind of winding up here. Cathy, I think my interest is a little bit more about you and your career. There's thousands of people in talent acquisition, recruiters, and many of them have big career ambitions. And then there's almost nobody leading TA at organizations with 80,000 employees. What do you think you've done different in your career to rise to this level that others haven't done?
Well, I would tell you, I look up to plenty of Fortune 100, 500 companies that are TA executives of, 200,000, right? I have Disney in my backyard. They're global TA heads there. And I'm on a board for ATAP, the Association for Talent Acquisition Professionals. And we have fantastic TA leaders leading, hundreds of thousands of employees. So I really look up to them as they've grown in their own careers, and that opportunity for me, in the healthcare space, we're in top 10 size, but there are definitely healthcare organizations that are larger than us, and I see those TA leaders there. I think I have, for my own, I said, well, what have you done? I think I've been willing to move for the opportunity. I've been willing to take risk on positions that maybe somebody else might not have taken because of the difficulty of it or the situation or how volatile are you walking into a situation. that may need a lot of cleanup. There's a lot of different things going on out there. Are you willing to take risk? And taking risk to a new position is definitely being a little bit more, as I was listening to a Brene Brown video yesterday about being courageous and making yourself a little bit more vulnerable. But that's how you succeed, is taking on those risks.
I love that answer.
Yeah, Jess, and just that resonates with you because you've taken so many risks, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about entrepreneurs. I mean, I love Shark Tank as a default, channel. There's nothing else on because I'm so inspired by people that just take risk on the smallest product or the smallest idea, and have turned it into these multi-billion-dollar organizations, with the help of an expert or not. But wow, I mean, that's amazing.
Would you pretty much say, Cathy, that that's how anybody should plan their career? Take a bit of risk, try a couple of positions which are maybe outside your comfort zone, and then just see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I was inspired by Sheryl Sandberg's book about being a woman in top executive male dominated industry, and she said that most women she found would make sure that they're 100% qualified for a job before they would apply for it. And she found that men would make sure that they're 80% qualified, they're going to push and apply for it. And, and I think that's true. I think we want to be safe and make sure that we're qualified for a position. And we need to think like that. We need to stretch our own selves. All of us do. And go for that next level position and take a risk. That's how you learn.
I definitely see that on my show where the percentage of male leaders having someone reaching out saying, hey, can he be on your show? It is just way, way higher. And then at times we're like, hey, we need more. Like, there are a lot of great female leaders. Let's get more out here. And so I'll have my team go out and go after lists of top women CEOs, top female leaders, and they are less likely to say yes to come on the show. And it's an interesting thing where, I did CEO coaching for like a dozen years. And as an overgeneralization, I'd say most of my male clients could use a little more humility, and most of my female clients could use a little extra confidence.
Yeah, I think we're very humble and we want to make sure. I'm like, really? What? Sometimes I think that, what do I have to say? There's plenty of people that are doing more phenomenal things than me. But then I think about, what people look up to me and say, wow, what has she done, and want to learn. So, I just put it in perspective and want to share, I hope people will surpass me. When I have my employees leave I've had several employees leave that were my direct reports take on a number one job at another organization. And I said, well, great. Well, just make sure you remember me, because you never know. You might hire me when I'm retired and just want to be a consultant, or you might do bigger and better things than me. And I really encourage that because I want to see what somebody does with what I've learned or what I've mentored them in.
Well, I think that attitude is exactly why Gautam and I were both so excited you were willing to be on the show. So thank you for making time for this.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Cathy. This was really good fun.
Oh, it's a lot of fun to talk about TA.
And is LinkedIn the best place for people to connect to you?
I think so. I think I have my work email is in my contact information on LinkedIn. So you're more than welcome to email me at my AdventHealth account, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. I answer all emails in LinkedIn or reach outs, and I accept most all invitations. And I love to use that as a tool.
Well, this is so fun. Thank you again for doing this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.